Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of One Pittsfield with Mayor Marchetti. I am joined today by the city's Finance Director, Matt Curwood, but before we get into our conversation, I have a few important updates to share. Some of our community events. Since our last episode, I've been busy at work attending several meetings and participating in a variety of community events, including the Jonathan Levine Pittsfield Middle School Spelling Bee, where I was honored to be a judge, and the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. celebration at the Price Memorial AME Zion Church. Also had a meeting with the Task Force for Mental Health and Substance Use, and we are still working within our subcommittees to identify areas that we can focus on. Again, those focus groups are safety, quality of life, life skills, and the Mental Health Substance Use Task Force. On January 16th, I held my first State of the City address in which I reflected on 2024 and outlined some initiatives and projects that we have in the year ahead. Some of these focus on housing, economic development, and public services. I also spent the last part of last week attending the Mass Municipal Association's annual meeting and trade show. This annual event is a great opportunity to network with fellow elected leaders and municipal officials from across the state while participating in engaging sessions on topics that impact all communities in Massachusetts. On January 21st, Wander, the newest cafe in our downtown, held their official grand opening. Although they've been open for a couple months, it was great to officially welcome them to the downtown. Starting on February 1st, Downtown Pittsfield and Milltown Foundation are hosting a month-long downtown restaurant celebration, A Taste of Downtown. During the month of February, every time you dine or make a purchase at one of these 19 restaurants and bars, you'll receive an entry into a giveaway for 19 gift cards, one from each participating location at a $500 value. If you dine on a Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday at one of these locations, you'll receive a double entry into the drawing. For more information or details, check out downtownpittsfield.com. As a reminder, if your business or organization is celebrating a milestone or other exciting news, please send an email to my office, mayor's office at cityofpittsfield.org, with the details, as we would like to recognize you as part of this ongoing program. Let's give you a brief update of the council agenda. And the January 28th City Council meeting has a pretty short agenda. On the agenda, we have two different sets of appointments. We have the reappointments of Dr. Evan Dobell, Michael Mazzio, and James Titello to the Sister City Commission, and the reappointment of Allison Holmes and Thomas Goggins to the Zoning Board of Appeals. Other items on the council agenda is a request to borrow $1,040,000 for the construction of Taxiway A at the Pittsfield Municipal Airport. I submitted a request for the creation of a median safety ordinance. As some of you may remember, I had originally proposed a similar ordinance back in 2023 as a city councilor, as there have been concerns about public safety at several intersections, including Weston Center, East and First, South and East Housatonic, and all intersections in Allendale and Park Square. In order to improve safety at all these locations, I am reintroducing this safety median ordinance for the council's review, and at the Ordinance and Rules Subcommittee, we will supply the public safety data that we have in regards to these intersections. I've also submitted an update to the City Council about the Berkshire Carousel. The current owner of the carousel recently contacted me to let me know that the organization wants to withdraw their offer to gift the carousel to the City of Pittsfield. As many people know, as I was having conversations before City Council, it was my hope to be able to obtain the carousel, get the carousel up and running, and then provide the carousel to Friends of the Carousel organization that could run the carousel. And as luck would have it, without it even coming to the city, I think we've been able to spark that conversation. And so the Friends of the Carousel are working with the owner to get it open and operating this year, and then we'll assist where we can if there's anything that needs to be done to help for a full transition of the carousel to the Friends. So as I said, it's going to be a pretty short council meeting. I know that we have some items that you'll hear later tonight at the Ordinance and Rules Subcommittee meeting. And so as a precursor to the next meeting, you'll hear that I've been at the Ordinance and Rules Subcommittee. In 2 weeks, we'll be there tonight. So now that I'm made it through the updates, we can get to the next part of the show. So I'm happy to welcome Matt Curwood, who serves as Finance Director and Treasurer. Matt, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Last time I was scheduled to be on, I was suffering from shingles and was in no condition to sit in a chair and have a conversation about anything.
Well, the good part about that is that your staff was able to step into your place and carry the conversation about the tax classification process and the assessment process. So,
yeah, and Laura does a great job of what she does and was able to fill that role quite well.
And it was a pleasure to watch you across the table just answering, to be able to say something when you were off camera and you had to be quiet. So
most of it was grimacing in pain, but and just so anybody who's out there, as I said before, get the single shot, please. I urge you to do that.
So I've known you for a long time, so this is kind of a silly question to ask, but as it's been a practice on the show, and the show isn't just about me and whatever department head I have on. This is about the public, trying to introduce to the public the department heads and the people that are working for the city. So why don't we start out by you just giving a little bit of background about your work experience, both at the local level, because you've held multiple positions in local government and also on the state level.
Well, my career in government began in 1991 when I was hired as a legislative aide to then State Senator Jane Swift. Was on her staff until I transitioned to the Weld administration, working for the Office of Business Development, kind of doing what Mike Coakley does for the city, but on a statewide basis and a Western Mass basis, specifically was my territory. And then I left government for a little bit, was doing some consulting. And then, while I was working for the state, I served on the city council, as you well know, with you and without you, kind of back and forth. So that was for 10 years as an at-large councilor. And then in 2007-ish, somewhere around there, 8, 9, I transitioned to kind of being more into local government and served as the town administrator in Blandford for about 2 years. And then became the town administrator in Richmond and was there for 7 years. Again, that was kind of the tail end of my council career when I was in Richmond. And then when former Mayor Tyre was elected, she contacted me and asked to see if I wanted to be your finance director. I agreed, and I've been here ever since in that role. So I'm a recovering town administrator.
So you've seen a lot in regards to budget preparations, capital planning, conducting fiscal outlooks in your role as a town administrator, town manager, as your role in city council, as your role as finance director, and even with some of the state responsibilities. So I think you probably have a different perspective than many. Let's just start about talking about what is the role of the finance director and treasurer, and what are some of the day-to-day responsibilities that you do?
It kind of, overall, it varies from community to community. I mean, treasurer is pretty straightforward. A treasurer, our office is responsible for collecting all the revenue that is generated by the city. Even the money that goes into from the tax collector's office, even though they pay to the tax collector's office, they basically, what we call, turn it over to my office so that it can be booked and accounted for, documented. So that's kind of the main role. And we also are the ones that are responsible to actually send out checks. The accounting office will audit the vouchers, will create the warrant, and then we will take that warrant and then issue the checks and send out the checks from the treasurer's office. The treasurer is also in charge of tax title. Any property that is placed into tax title by the tax collector, once that happens, all payments that are tax title related payments need to be made to the treasurer's office, while any current taxes that are due continue to be paid to the tax collector. Our office also, in this structure in the city, is also responsible for payroll, benefits for employees, and the like. And that's not the case in every community. Sometimes it's in different places, but here those functions are part of the treasurer's office function. On the finance director side, it's kind of more of however the mayor at the time decides to use the finance director from a policy perspective, from a budgetary oversight perspective, which is what I do constantly in terms of working with department heads, maintain and review their budgets, not only at the beginning, but throughout the fiscal year. Prepare the capital plan, as you had indicated. And in this role, I've kind of been an operations guy, just because of my experience as a town administrator and town manager. I understand how the operations work. So I've kind of play that role in a lot of cases, and the department heads will come to me with kind of operational questions that you don't really need to be consumed with or bothered with, but we can, strategize and figure out a path forward.
And so when we think finance director or treasurer, we think of that office, and your office has 7 employees, if I'm counting correctly, just in that one office. If I open the door that says finance director office, but 5. Okay. You also have those members in the accounting office that's next door to you. All the people in the tax collector's office, the assessor's office, and purchasing.
Purchasing, yes.
Are all under
the finance and administration, which I'm the director of. So yeah, so all those offices that you stated are my direct reports, and if you total all that up, it's roughly 20. So
as many people have probably read in the press, the governor just recently unveiled her fiscal year 26 budget, and so I think that happened on Wednesday. We haven't had a ton of time to be able to dive into the numbers, but as we're in the early stages of planning, let's talk about the steps that we'll put together to go from today to approximately May 1st, when we present the budget to the City Council for the very first time.
Well, from a planning standpoint, you start on the revenue side, and there are, as you stated, the governor released her budget, which will have the local aid numbers, the preliminary or the governor's budget cherry sheets were just released by the Department of Revenue. We've looked at them really briefly, but all in all, I think for the 2 main ones that we pay the most attention to are Chapter 70, which is education aid, and what I still call the lottery aid, but everybody else calls UGA. Unrestricted government assistance, or whatever it's called right now. We saw an increase in both those, about 4.4 on the Chapter 70 and roughly 300,000 on UGA. So we'll have to take those numbers, and then that's the first step. And then the second step, in terms of the revenue forecasting, is I will take a look at where we are on local receipts, develop the strategy for local receipts for fiscal year 26. In some cases, we're trending above estimates. Other cases, we're trending below estimates. So you have to kind of weigh all that and figure out, where you need to go on your local receipts. Again, with stressing being conservative in local receipts, that the Department of Revenue consistently preaches, and I continually preach. And then the last piece is kind of looking at the levy, the tax levy piece. And so you can. The simple part of the math is, your current levy times 2.5%, and that's, again, Proposition 2.5. The trickier part is looking at your forecasting for what your new growth is going to be. And so I'll take and look at a 10-year benchmark average and a 5-year benchmark average. And we usually use the 5-year benchmark average as kind of the new growth factor. And again, that's the only thing in the 2.5 formula that changes. Because the levy is the levy, 2.5% is 2.5%. So that new growth is the piece that changes, and that has an impact on where you are from a levy standpoint in terms of overall what you can raise from the levy. And then the second part of that, obviously, is the expense side, and working with department heads and yourself to develop a budget that fits within that revenue forecast.
So, and I think I just want to caution folks, and I had been kind of cautioning folks from the beginning, and you and I had a conversation one day, and it was interesting because revenues are revenues, and in most cases we can't control what those are, right? The only revenue source that we get to control is our property tax revenue. We get to be able to set a tax rate, but our hotel motel tax revenues, that's controlled
by other forces.
Folks that are coming into the Berkshires or Pittsfield as a tourist destination, folks that go out to eat, whether they're from town or out of town, our cannabis revenues, a lot of our revenues are generated from sources that we can't control. But you and I were having a conversation one day about Pittsfield having a spending problem. And I kind of challenged back and said, is it a spending problem or is it a budgeting problem? And so, like, one of the things that sits on my forefront, especially when we talk about the school department, and so there was good news in the increase of Chapter 70 money, 4.4 million.
We also got bad news too.
Right, $4.4 million in increased revenues there, but that 4.4 million, based on the conversations we're having in the schools, really only allows us to provide salary increases or to maintain the course. It doesn't provide any other stuff. And so I think there's some sustainability issues with our budgeting process, and like a regular household, the cost for me to live between paying for my homeowner's insurance and paying for my car insurance and going to the grocery store continue to rise. And the same thing happens on the city side. So can we talk about the sustainability of some of the programs? Or is that not a concern for you?
Well, I think in terms of, what do you mean by, well, I guess the question I want, what do you mean by programs in terms of just the overall?
Well, I should say budget, the budget process.
Well, I think, one of the things, in you and I both attended the municipal finance update workshop at the MMA that you mentioned we were just at. And, Sean Cronin, who is the director of, works in the Department of Revenue, director of local services, loves his data, loves his charts, loves his graphs. But it's important information. And I think one of the things that stuck out, again, was the fact that we in the city of Pittsfield are not unique in terms of facing this levy challenge. And the comment was made that there are, more and more communities are bumping up against their levy limit and not having, the excess levy capacity that they used to have in the past. There are some exceptions to that. Obviously, if you look at the larger communities and Boston's and the Worcesters and whatever, but all in all, I mean, and so that was kind of telling. And there's other data points in there that I think point to and again, there was one of the discussions was and was articulated several times by several speakers, was first, get your tax rate in on time. And that message was hounded pretty, was hammered home pretty well. But the other thing was the point about new growth. And we've had this conversation. When we were having this budget, do we have a spending problem or do we have a revenue problem? That new growth piece. And again, it's not just us. It's not just the city of Pittsfield. It's again, and he showed a chart that showed new growth. And again, absent some of the larger communities, the Bostons, where you've got skyscrapers going up all the time and all that's new growth. Other communities, new growth is a challenge. And if you looked at the chart, what you saw on the tail end of the chart was new growth really kind of declining. So that's a challenge, and that creates budgetary challenges. That creates budgetary pressures. That again, as we said before, you build the revenues, and then you have to build the spending into those revenues.
And I think, I think a lot of folks just think that the budget just appears, and I think we got
we're making sausage is what we're doing.
Right, and I think we have some time. Last year we did 3 directives. Give me a level funded, which means you're not going to get any more money than you got last year. Make it work. Level service funded. We'll give you the contractual obligations, both from a salary aspect, or you have a contract with company X and that goes up by 2.5%. We'll give you those numbers, and then we said, give us a wish list. We never really got to the wish list because of the constraints that we have. Maybe
there were onesies
piece,
and twosies.
That you were able to, and so. When we looked at that process, we kind of went, what are we doing? Because we're all over the board, from a doomsday scenario to here's your pie in the sky, what can you be? And you had to kind of figure it out. As we go through this process this year, I think that you and I have had the conversation that having departments go through that exercise really isn't a worthwhile exercise at this stage of the game. We saw, if we did a level funded budget last year, there were a number of layoffs. And on the school side, I think we were in the perfect storm, because not only could we not keep up with the rising costs with being able to allow an appropriation that did that, but we also were being crunched on the other side, that all the ESSER funding and all of the other grant monies that we had been utilizing since the beginning of COVID were now reaching the end of their lifetime. And so on the school side, you saw the double whammy, because you saw grant monies or ESSER funding that was disappearing, while you saw that we couldn't keep pace with being able to look at increases. And I just kind of, and I've been making this point often, and so I just want to kind of talk about it in the big picture, but especially how it relates into the schools. And so we heard a lot of conversation during last year's budget process on how we cut the school budget. And up until the last minute, when the city council made a $200,000 reduction in the proposed mayor's school committee budget, and that's the language we use, the school department's appropriation from the city of Pittsfield was over $19 million. The year prior it was $18 million. So the city's $19 million appropriation was the largest appropriation that the city's ever provided to the school department, as well as the Chapter 70 money, after we worked out some of our deals, was $63 million, up almost $2.5 or maybe $3 million from the prior year. And we talk about cuts. And so, I guess this is where I'm trying to go back to the sustainability factor. Just because we can't get from what we have to what we should have, if everything is level service funded, it doesn't mean we're making reductions. And
no, what it means is we're living within the revenue sources that we have. I mean, we all can say that our needs exceed what we can afford. We all know that, so it's a matter of how you just put together the best scenario you can from a spending standpoint, given the revenues that you have. And again, every year kind of becomes a challenge. You made the point about last year with the ESSER funds disappearing. I'm not quite sure what's going to happen with federal dollars going forward, given the tenor that's coming out of Washington at the moment. So that needs to be, we need to pay attention to that, because that can have a dramatic impact on our, how we function and how we budget. And the other thing is, and again, I mentioned we got good news at the MMA. We also got bad news at the MMA in that we're a member of the Maya Health Insurance Trust, and they announced the percentage of rate increases for next year, and the range is from 9% to 19.2%, with the average being 14.8. So if we're anywhere in that average at 14.8, that just added roughly $5 million to our health insurance costs. So that becomes, again, to the point we were making before. How do you have to maneuver all this and figure out how you can take that impact and make it work within the revenue stream that you have, because you just can't,
And the budget is like,
because if you're short on your revenues, because again, when we go through the tax classification process, especially on local receipts specifically, if you're raising local receipts beyond to unrealistic expectations, DOR is going to call you out on it and say you need to justify this, because if you look at your 5-year average, you're nowhere near this number. So where do you think this is coming from? So you can't just fake it till you make it. You got it. It's got to be real, and it's got to be supported.
So in the next week or so, we go before the City Council and School Committee and the annual joint meeting. And I think we've already been kind of talking about some of this, talking about the financial condition of the city, and looking at the fiscal year 25 budget. We seem to be running according to plan for the most part. I don't see anything that's jumping out that scares me, that says, this will cause us a major problem, other than the things that I think have always given the mayor or city council or finance director heartburn when they look at, because they're just line items that generally run over.
Snow and ice.
Exactly, snow and ice. And I think we've been talking about, some of the constraints when it comes to crafting the budget this year. So I know we touched a lot on new growth. I guess the two things that I'd like you to share with the viewers, and one is, a simplified version of the difference between the levy limit and the levy ceiling. And then let's end the show with talking about the capital improvement plan and what that means, because I think there's still a lot of people in this community that think when they see capital improvement plan, that's all the monies that we're going to spend.
So levy ceiling versus levy limit, the simplest way to do it is the levy ceiling is 2.5% of your total valuation. That's your levy ceiling. That's the maximum that you could ever go. Your levy limit is, again, driven by the formula of Proposition 2.5, which is 2.5%. This year's levy times 2.5% plus new growth. That's what you can get in the next fiscal year. So again, and there are times when those two things crash, and they did here in the city of Pittsfield. When I first came in as finance director, we hit our levy ceiling and levy limit were the same. So the thing with levy ceiling and levy limits, this is where the Proposition 2.5 overrides come in. Where if you're at your levy limit and you can't make it work and you need to go and vote an override, which needs to be approved by the voters, you have that room between the levy limit and the levy ceiling to have that override. That's where why it's important those two numbers be different, and why there be a pretty good gap in between them, so that you have that capacity if, again, for whatever, you cannot make it within the constraints of your levy and you feel the need to go to the voters for an override. The last piece on terms on capital planning is extremely important, because it helps you, and we do a 5-year forecast, because it helps you plan. It helps you create a road map for future projects. It doesn't necessarily mean that all those projects are going to get done, but at least they're on a radar. They're documented someplace, and then again, as financial conditions and circumstances evolve, you can then decide how do you want to approach those projects. And there are some projects that might get kicked out in infinitum, but yet they're still on a plan as a concept, as an idea, and then ultimately what is approved is whatever the mayor brings to the city council, either at budget time or at other times during the course of the year, for capital projects that are then voted on and approved and appropriated by the city council.
So this show always goes by extremely quick when we have a guest on and we start diving into questions.
Especially a chatty one.
As we begin the fiscal year 26 budget process, there'll be a lot more to come. Stay tuned for Wednesday, February 5th. I think it's Wednesday, but I know it is February 5th, for the joint meeting between the school committee and city council, where we'll begin our initial stuff. So until next time, take care of yourself, and we'll see you in the next episode.